Hey, hello. It is Monday, August 30th of 2021. Javi and I are going to talk about the new core marketing website from the digital experience team, perhaps team name to be changed. Who knows? Yeah. We don't have an agenda for this. I'm going to try and keep it like to the point and try not to like ramble too much. There's a lot of stuff going on. We haven't pulled up an agenda. This is a little informal. I don't want to make it too long, but I don't know. Let's find what's useful. I'm going to share my screen and just sort of like drive around and show like what we got going on. So this is the core marketing site. It's a public repository as most of our projects are. And I'll drop a link to it, or we have a handbook link to it, which is also in the repository here. So at its core, it is a Nuxt site. So Nuxt is like a framework for writing Vue.js, provides utilities to build either like single page applications, server-side rendering applications, or in our case, statically generated websites. And we've enabled TypeScript support. Something that's good to know is that, so TypeScript support is enabled. It is preferred, but you can opt out of it if you have reasons. So there are some things like in particular, I have actually more than one. I have a couple of plugins that we need to use that are written as just plain JavaScript files, because it makes more sense to keep their third-party integrations. And instead of spending the time to convert the third-party integration to TypeScript and then in the process of that deviating from the third party like happy path, I'd rather just keep things as they are. So the nice thing is you don't have to write TypeScript. So if you're coming to this from a non-TypeScript background, you can still be productive. And I think we should, as much as possible, prefer TypeScript. It will prevent us from making author time mistakes, as more so than if we didn't use it. It'll also provide convenient just code completion stuff and other tooling there. So where you can write TypeScript if you're writing JavaScript, but you do have an escape hatch if you need to get something done and you don't want to, learn TypeScript to do the one quick thing you need to have done, or if there's a good reason like a third party integration that doesn't have TypeScript support. So yeah, that's sort of the top level here. We've got oops, sorry, I didn't mean to expand that. We have like a GitLab pages site specifically for this. You'll notice actually that the root, so maybe here's another good thing to talk about is like, this is supposed to be, it's not a full drop-in replacement for the existing marketing site at about.gitlab.com. It is a supplemental website, and it would be like almost like if we were building a mono repo, but for technical reasons, like a mono repo doesn't solve our problems. But the current middleman sites all deploy to the same Google Cloud storage container, right? And we just have routing set up for them through Fastly. So the nice thing is anything can deploy to it as long as it has the right keys. So this is just another repository that has its own ecosystem that deploys to the same Google Cloud bucket because because it's a statically generated website. So at the end of the day, it compiles down to HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And like you can put it on any static file server and it'll work. So it gives us a lot of options and flexibility. So the reason I said that is you can go to the pages deployment of it, but we don't build index.html because we're not yet ready to be serving the homepage from this. So right now I have a test page, which you can see here instead. So can I expand this? Yeah. So yeah, this is like the test page. So you have to go to like /test page. As we build more pages, they'll become available here. This is not meant to be like it exists as a reference point. It's like, hey, we build something to somewhere, but it's not really meant to be like a particularly useful tool. We do actually have review applications set up for it. And here, let me look at a merge request. Let's find a merged one. Review app. Yeah, this will do it. So you can actually go to, so now when you make MRs, it might be gone because this is an older branch. I did this a while ago. So we have review apps enabled, and it'll review whatever changes you made. So I'll stop there. That's a lot, but there's plenty more to talk about. Javi, do you have specific questions starting from
Yes,
there?
I do. I have
Yeah,
one
let's do it.
specific question in particular. Okay.
Okay.
And I think it was kind of like primed by like something I had in mind, is that I built a footer component with slippers and it's essentially using Vue purely based on templating. I'm not using it for any sort of like, I'm not using it like a Vue lifecycle at any point. Would a setup that we have here just statically render a footer?
Yep, precisely. And that's what it's doing in. So I'll talk about two things: about one, the integration, and then two, what's actually happening. So a note, we're doing docs in this docs folder. If you go to the README, there is a note about it, GitLab documentation. So a lot of the README is just the boilerplate Nuxt README, and I want to just keep it there as much as possible. Like, until it makes sense for us to deviate from the convention, I will stick to the convention. But I did want more detailed places to put notes about what's going on and decisions. Basically, my rubric here is, if I am making a change to the website that is not the standard Nuxt configuration, I have to write a note about it and why I made that change, right? Like if I made a decision that Nuxt didn't make for me, I go write about that decision so people understand that it was made, right? And I think other folks should follow that same kind of approach, as much as is
generally
reasonable.
speaking, yeah.
Yeah. So there's a docs folder, docs, and there's a Slippers UI folder. So there's a link to the Slippers UI repository, and we use TypeScript. And so there's a note about, we have a declaration file that basically says, hey, this is a module. And it lets us when we're talking to TypeScript, we can say, hey, this library doesn't have typings. Don't worry about it. Just hand wave it away. Just it's nothing. It's a module. And so we pull it in, and we pull it in as a plugin, where basically we do, if you've seen what we've done on the middleman site, we do kind of the same thing where we grab Slippers components from our package, and then we register each component from Slippers UI as a component here, right? We just register it to Vue. There's some documentation on what plugins are and how they work in Nuxt, but basically, Nuxt is a layer that's kind of on top of Vue. Nuxt as like a framework has its own Vue instance. It's like, hey, like I know what Vue.js, the library, is, and we have these opportunities and plugins to like modify that instance of Vue.js. And so that's what we're doing here. And we modify Vue.js. So now Vue.js knows about Slippers UI components. It's just built into our instance of Vue, which Nuxt is hooking into here. So it's like, hey, if I call SLP navigation, I know what a component is, right? We also, in our config file, because Slippers UI comes with its own styles, we actually tell Nuxt that it should grab those styles as well. So we grab that here, right? And then to answer your question specifically, so that's how Slippers is like integrated, is like it's installed as a package, installed as a plugin, configured to grab any of the assets we need from it. We could do the same even with images if we included them. We shouldn't, but we could. Then you can just, sorry, I try not to say just, then you can use components from Slippers UI as though they are built-in components to Nuxt. So this is our layout file. We have one default layout right now. It's just top level layouts, default.vue. You use for layout files and pages, you use Vue single file components. This layout gets wrapped around everything. So you'll see this Nuxt component is like a custom Nuxt component that basically says whatever Nuxt is doing, put it inside here, but we're wrapping it in like a little container div. And I dropped SLP navigation, which is the SLP navigation component here at the top. And now you'll see here's our component. Oh, I think I actually need to, we need to wire up little event listener on that button because it's not built into the component itself. You'll see here though, the navigation is working, right? This is rendered statically. So when we generate all of these things, you can get in. Nuxt is clever and it will actually tell you, it leaves breadcrumbs for itself. So I think you can actually go into, oh, maybe not.
Developer tools, maybe?
Oh, you can't with a static site anymore. Okay,
Right.
that's great. But that's good because this is all just statically generated. This is exactly what we want it to be. It's not a view component. It's not rendering client side. It is
Yeah.
statically generated, and it's. Oh, I know why. This is the build. This is the production build, which does
Oh,
that. I think the development
locally?
build. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
locally, if I do yarn dev, I think in this instance / test page. Once it boots up. Yeah, I think in this instance, it actually makes that available to me. So this is exactly like a good thing to show is like there is.
Because right here it would be a view component, right?
Yes, and there you go. You have it. So you can
Yeah.
actually see. So what'll happen is in development mode, when you run yarn dev, is the command I ran here, it will render it as the server rendering version. If you wanted to check out what the statically built one would be, it would be you would run yarn generate. So, and this will be good for debugging. So like, keep in mind, if you're just doing yarn dev, you are in a very different environment or a slightly different environment than the production build will be in. If you run yarn generate, you'll get a production build, or you'll get a static build that is similar to the production build, although it'll be from the development environment, so it might be a little different. It'll go to this dist folder, which is somewhat conventional. And then if you wanted to serve it, so you could do like npx http server dist, right? And that's just I just ran like a little local server for folks who haven't used it before, and here we are. There's no index page, right? Like I said, so we're just getting the plain. But here's like a test page. Here we are, and then here you'll see this should look. Yeah, there's no view dev tools here, and this should look exactly like this. So if you want to see the static build, you do have to take you have to go a different route than the development. But generally speaking, you don't want to do this because this doesn't have like hot reloading, like it doesn't have all the niceties. You don't get the view tools. If you want the view tools, you should run yarn dev, and that's going to be the best developer experience when you're working locally on the site. But if you run into bugs that you're not precisely like, if you get a bug in production that you're not seeing in development, one of the first things I would do is I would go check out the statically generated version of it locally and see if that helps like clear up any confusions. Because again, answering your question, if we just dropped SLP footer into this layout file, I have the zoom tools up here, so I can't see it perfectly.
Yeah.
Into the layout file, if we dropped.
Why don't you try it? I'm kind of curious.
Oh, is it in there? I haven't updated the version of.
Oh, okay. Let's see if it'll work.
Yeah.
Because I might have not included it, like, since it's only, yeah, I think I need to include, like, in the main.js, it needs to be included in there.
So, yes, it does. Have you done that in a different version of Slippers?
No, I have not.
Okay, cool. So there's no way for us to get it. But what we could do is we can run yarn upgrade Slippers UI to get the latest, or you could do yarn upgrade at a specific version.
Actually, let me check. Actually, I answered that and I'm actually not sure, but I would think no. Like if I had to guess.
Here, I'll upgrade Slippers UI here. Let's find out. This is a good demonstration of like what if you need to upgrade to a Slippers version, or if you need to pin it to a specific one. Use the yarn tools for it because it's installed as a yarn package.
Yeah, I don't think so though. Okay. Now that I think, because I haven't touched that at all. So if you've had
it might not be there.
Yeah,
I haven't done it, so I don't think we'll actually end up getting it, even if we get this most recent version of Slippers UI. But yeah, the answer is it will become statically rendered. It won't look statically rendered in yarn dev, right? But it would if you added the footer to the package, we upgraded it in Nuxt, and then I did the thing that I did in the layout file and added it here. Mm-hmm. Then ran yarn generate, it would become statically rendered. You can opt out of this if you want to. There is a Nuxt component, Nuxt client side. I think it's client side rendering only. They've changed the name of this tag a handful of times. It used to be at one point, no SSR. Yeah, it is now. It used to be no SSR. It used to be client only. So if you had a component that needed to be rendered in the client side, like if it needed like browser APIs to work, or if you were like dynamically loading stuff into the client, like whatever reason, you could wrap components in client only. But now they have no-SSR, which is the thing to use.
Yeah, I gotcha.
And here's an example. I think this is like an older example. Like let's say you had this comments thing. There's like a loading indicator, right? All they do is they wrap it in client only, and Nuxt just knows, hey, so if you wanted your footer to be a client-side component, I don't think it should be, but if there was a good reason for it, we could wrap it in client-only, we could wrap it in no-SSR, and then Nuxt would skip generating it, but it would leave what it needed to render it as a client-side component.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
so we should use it sparingly. There's I don't think we have a ton of use cases for things like that for this particular website. So if you see no-SSR, you should, ask the question of like, why does this need to be a client-side component? Because every time we do that, we, lose some of our performance.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, for probably something that we can do a different way.
Yeah, for sure. No, that makes sense.
Cool.
Sweet.
Did that answer your question on the footer?
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay. Other things. So I've talked about what it is. We've talked about documentation. We've talked about sort of the slippers integration and what's happening there. We've talked about sort of the build steps, the difference between development and generating. Production does what yarn generate does, but it's got a different like environment variable. So we can switch on behavior in production and in development modes if we want. Right now, there's nothing happening there other than it's just a different environment variable. Nuxt might have some performance optimizations under the hood, but we don't need to worry about that. What else? Do you have other specific questions?
I had one for the GitLab CI. That was just like generally just.
Sure.
I guess I'm just looking at it because that's just like I haven't seen it, so I'm curious. Like, is there anything particularly insightful about what you've done so far, or is it just a straight like?
Yeah, there is. So the first is thanks again to Chad Woolley. We started from a lot of boilerplate that he had put together for static site GitLab CI templates. So a lot of these things you see here, especially with these comments, are performance and reliability optimizations, right, that we can do since we're mostly doing static site generation. I had to deviate a little bit from what he normally had because we use each job in the pipeline spins up a Docker instance and grabs a Docker image. Something that's different about this website than what we have in the middleman site. In the middleman site, we maintain and publish a custom Docker image for about.gitlab.com. So you may be used to working with tools that don't come with a lot of these images. And I ran into this. I was like, oh, why don't I have this tool? Why don't I have that tool? I was like, right, because I haven't like written a custom Docker for it. For a moment, I was like, okay, let's use the middleman one, but it comes with a bunch of stuff we don't need, like Ruby. Like we don't need any Ruby here. So I was like, no, there's got to be a different way. So we default to, generally speaking, most jobs will run with the Node Alpine Linux image, which is just like a very slim version of a Docker container that has like Node.js at version 15.4 and is like pretty fast to spin up and tear down. In other cases, so I had to split out a build step, which uses Node to build. So it says like, okay, I have Node, so I can run Nuxt because it's all Node generated, it's all Node code. But we have a deployment stage. So build stage just uses default image, but our deployment stage needs Google Cloud SDK. And the great thing here is that Google Cloud publishes an SDK image. but I needed to split out the build and deployment steps. So the deployment step only does things using the Google Cloud SDK image, and the build step only does things that it requires Node for. So it's a little bit different than what we're used to working with, which is basically we have like a custom in Middleman, we have a custom image that's kind of like can do whatever it needs to do, because over time it is sort of like people have built up what we needed. We're starting from a blank slate here, so there's nothing that custom works for us out of the box. Eventually we'll probably want to maintain our own Docker image that's specific, but in this case, at the stage we're in, it's a very bare bones configuration. So I just wanted to use whatever's out of the box, and that's the same kind of deal with like the Nuxt configuration. Is like my guiding principle here is do everything as standard as possible. Like if there's something that is like documented elsewhere by a tool, like go with the conventional documentation unless there's a really good reason not to. And because we can accomplish these tasks using like very conventional configuration items, I did that to start. And we may find that eventually we need our own custom Docker, like our own Docker image built, but we don't right now. So there's no reason to make it.
Yeah.
So
I would assert, this is my own opinion, like I would even challenge, like, do we need would we ever need a custom Docker? Like maybe there's a good reason at some point, but like
we might be able to optimize. We might be able to, because there's some caching we can do if we use just one. We might have a complicated job that needs like a bunch of different functionality, and instead of like giving it like, because with Docker you can say like we can just give it a whole like Linux machine to do, right? But like we don't need to. Like the thing about Docker is you can get all of your environmental dependencies in one place, and you can define them ahead of time, so you don't need to so you can be like extremely consistent and performant. And so if we had a job that needed like Node, and it needed Ruby, and it needed Python, and it needed Google SDK, and it needed like something else from our DNS provider that we had to have a tool for, like it might make a lot of sense to publish and maintain a custom Docker image, just to like streamline everything and keep, because like basically like that to me is the instance in which we would want to, you start talking about complexity, and like if we're at a point where we have all those things going on at one job and we can't separate it out, and there's just no getting around it, the job is complex, right? And so we should move the complexity into one place, and we should say, hey, look, we can't get around this complexity, but what we can do is we can like say very clearly, all of the complexity lives in our Docker image. And that's where we manage all the weirdness. And so if you think something's weird, start there, right? But we're not there yet. So there's no complexity to manage here yet. So there's no reason to manage it complexly.
Yeah. Gotcha. Sweet. All right. That's all. I think that's it.
Yeah, awesome. We'll have more to talk about when we've got pages built, including deployment stuff. I don't think it's not particularly relevant because I don't have deployments running right now, so I don't want to go into them because I don't even know what I know 90% of how it's going to work, but I won't know it until it's done. So
something I will probably want to do is switch our footer for the SLP footer in about, so that like those, because there's like slight deviations between the two. And I think it would just like for a consistency, like CSS experience, like I feel like it would just make sense to just have it all in one thing.
Yeah, we're gonna run into this, and this is just something I think we're gonna have to handle on a case by case basis. Like keep in mind, like the goal of this website is to be the core marketing site, and to reduce and to very like fine tune the scope of what our team is responsible for. And so there will be points where we have inconsistencies, and we're just going to have to either live with them or find out whether or not they're a high enough priority to fix. But that's something that's a just do, right? Because that's I think such a straightforward solve that we don't need to like put together a complex decision and say like, oh, like do we need to like do this? It's like, yeah, like
I mean, like
drop it in.
This kind of seems like a thing where it's like I'll make an MR. And like people, if we don't move forward with the MR, that's a whole nother story. Yeah. But like making the MR is the first step.
Yeah, precisely. And then we can talk about it in there about whether or not it makes sense to do. My guess is it will make sense to do this. This is an easy example, but there will be harder examples where we find that certain types of pages aren't yet handled by Nuxt, and there's some inconsistencies between them, or like child pages and stuff. And we just will have to make some harder have some more challenging conversations about what's the priority, right? And like what's the driver to do it, and that's a bigger strategy decision. But the nice thing is we have the tools to resolve those, and the doing of the work is not the challenge, which is I think the big solve here. It is the strategy of the work which is the challenge. And like I think as with many other things, like that's one of those things where like if your hardest problems are in execution, then like something in your system isn't working, because like execution in 2021, writing software like should feel pretty smooth. Like like I think that's pretty true for work of the nature of ours. Like the execution should feel like pretty smooth. But if your execution doesn't feel smooth, then it's like, okay, we need to like something is broken in our system. But if your strategy is the most challenging thing, I think it's a perfect place to be in, because like the real work and value of what we do is like thinking about
exactly.
it's the same thing as you move your complexity to your Docker image. It's like if you've moved the complex decisions to your strategic decision making process, that's awesome. That's exactly where you want to be. You want to have challenging conversations in strategy, and you want to have easy choices in execution. And if you're there, you can move really quickly, right? And you can move like with purpose and efficiently, and do a lot of cool stuff.
Yeah, so, I agree wholeheartedly. Thank you so much for setting up this time.
Yeah, this was fun. I will stop us here, and I'll post this up later today.
Sweet. Thank you, Tyler.
Well, see ya, everyone. Thanks for watching.